Good morning, St. Paul's. There's no place like home. It is wonderful to be among you this morning. Mother Pauline and I had a whole lot of fun keeping this in the bag, but now the cat's out of the bag. And it is wonderful to be back home. I am grateful to this place for so many things, not least of which is raising me up and sending me off. I miss y'all like crazy and hold y'all in my hearts every day. It is wonderful to be back home. What I have to say today is more meditation than sermon, really. So I pray that you will indulge me. Beloved, what can a death row inmate teach us about the joy of generosity? What can a death row inmate teach us about stewardship, being a way of life that is rooted in gratitude, faith, and prayer? I'm so glad you asked. He can teach us everything. Yes, everything. A death row inmate can teach us that the joy that flows from generosity has its source in gratitude for, faith in, and prayer to the living God who has rescued us from the power of darkness and transferred us into the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. A death row inmate can show us that stewardship is a state of joy, that this state of joy is not a state of mind, but a state of being, which witnesses that Jesus has first place in everything, in how we use our hours and days and years, in how we pledge, spend our money, and share our substance, and yes, even in how we surrender ourselves. A death row inmate can reveal to us that stewardship is a state of joy that witnesses the reign of Christ. So this morning, beloved, I ask you to take a long, hard look at the scene of this execution in Luke's gospel. It's a grim, pathetic spectacle. Jesus, above whom is nailed the inscription, "This is the King of the Jews," hangs on the cross between two criminals, two death row inmates. One of the death row inmates, like the leaders and soldiers before him, derides Jesus and says, "Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other death row inmate rebukes him and then says, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus is battered and bruised, persecuted and powerless, derided and defeated. He could not look less like a king. Yet this death row inmate asks, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." But why? Why? The songwriter says there is a fountain filled with blood drawn from Emmanuel's veins. And he goes on to say, the dying thief rejoiced to see that fountain in his day. But what does the dying thief, this death row inmate, see? No less than the crucifixion and death of Jesus. But why does he rejoice to see that? Here at the place that is called the skull, there is not the slightest evidence that such a kingdom exists, ever has existed, or ever will exist. Yet this death row inmate has the audacity to use his last breath to ask Jesus, who does not even save himself, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." But I ask again, what does this death row inmate see? Why does he rejoice? Perhaps it is the way that Jesus turns the taunts of onlookers into a prayer that God forgives them. Perhaps it is the fact that he sees in Jesus' willingness to remain on the cross between two criminals, two death row inmates, the depth of God's forgiveness and reconciling power. Perhaps he is simply grateful for the gesture of solidarity, and his request of Jesus is an act of faith. Perhaps he surmises that Jesus is exactly where he wants to be. Whatever the reason, somehow this death row inmate sees in Jesus the embodiment of an upside-down kingship that is worthy of the last full measure of his devotion. Perhaps he sees in Jesus a king who does not shrink from being identified with him, a king who could piece him back together when the world was done tearing him apart. This death row inmate sees something in Jesus, and it stirs his convicted soul to cry out for salvation. Remember me when you come into your kingdom. Beloved, this death row inmate uses his last breath. He gives all that he has to show gratitude for, faith in, and to offer prayer to Jesus. This is his act of stewardship, because somehow he knows that Jesus is mighty to save. Somehow he knows that Jesus will answer his prayer. Somehow, for this death row inmate, stewardship becomes an act of protest that provides a glimpse and foretaste of paradise even before Jesus utters a single word. And so it is with us, beloved. I'll never presume to tell you how much or even how frequently to give of your time, talents, and treasures, or even of yourselves. But let me be clear about why you should give, about what stewardship really is. Stewardship is our act of protest against a lingering pandemic, the tribal divisions that imbue our politics, a society in which our lives still don't matter, mounting gun violence, the rising tide of white Christian nationalism. Stewardship is our act of protest. But even more than that, stewardship is how we witness in our hearts, here in this place and out in the world, that Christ, not Biden, not Harris, not McCarthy, not Schumer, not McConnell, not Kemp, not Trump, not even Obama, but Christ reigns. And as the death row inmate in Luke's gospel shows us, stewardship is an act of surrender to the one who sees us, whether we are well, fairly middling, broke, busted, disgusted, or tore up from the floor up, and loves us into wholeness. But even more than this, beloved, even more than this, the joy of stewardship, that is radical generosity of self, spirit, and substance, is leaning into the sheer grace and arresting truth of Jesus' promise to the death row inmate. Today you will be with me in paradise. Beloved, I stopped by to tell you that today in Luke's gospel is not merely a 24-hour period, but any moment when God's salvation fractures time. And likewise, paradise does not refer to a manifestation in some period beyond history. Paradise can refer to a manifestation right now. Paradise can manifest itself anytime, and that we recognize as surely as this death row inmate does, that low aim, not failure, is sin. That stewardship is not a call to give more, but to be more. More loving, more prayerful, more joyful, more discerning, more peaceful, more aware, more affirming, more patient, more humble, more kind, more understanding, more generous, more compassionate, more faithful, more committed, more gentle, more forgiving. It's a call to be more, beloved, because this world is crying out for more. Paradise can be today, any day, that we resolve to continue to be a church that not merely feeds people's body, St. Paul, but feeds people's soul. This call to stewardship that recognizes that what we are surrendering to is the mission that is boldly written across the bulletin in red: proclaim, witness, disciple, and draw. Because that's how we witness that Christ not only is sovereign over the world, but that Christ's reign has penetrated our hearts. Amen.